Hey, Mike here, producer behind ZERMELO, and in this video, I'm going to show you a couple ways to add some punch smack to your kick. And what we're going to do is work in a transient. There's a couple ways that I'd like to do this, and that's exactly what I'm going to show you in this video. Now, this is obviously has to do with mixing, maybe a little bit of producing, but I'm going to link my mixing course down below this video. Check that out if you're interested, or consider becoming a member of the ZERMELO Inner Circle, where you'll get access to all my production and mixing courses, plus unlimited feedback on your music. So check that out when you're interested. But other than that, let's roll the video. So to get started, what I want to do is I want to play the little groove that I'm working on that has the kick transient in it. Then I'm going to turn the kick transient off, and then I'm going to turn it back on so we can hear what we lose and then what we gain again. And what you're going to hear is more articulation in the kick, obviously, but therefore in the beat, in the groove, it's just going to sound cleaner. It's going to cut through, and this is kind of subtle. So it's not going to be anything earth-changing, but to my ears, it makes a dramatic difference to the clarity, to the punch of the entire track, just because of the articulation on the kick that comes from the transient. So again, it might seem a little bit subtle, but man, does it make a huge difference to my ears. All right, so let's go ahead and play it. I'm going to turn it off, then turn it back on again. Maybe I'll go back and forth. Just pay attention to when I do turn it on and off. Here we go. So like I said, to your ears, it might be subtle. I don't know. Okay. But to my ears, it makes a huge difference. It's what I was looking for. I needed that kick to grab me in the mix and just kind of poke me. And I think it's doing that here. And so there's a couple ways I'm going to show you how to do this in the video. A couple of them require third-party plugins, but if you don't have the third-party plugins, I'll show you a way to do this with Ableton only that makes a few use of secret features of Ableton. So we'll do a little bit of a walkthrough of those secret features to be able to do this. But in the meantime, let's just do the very simple, straightforward way of doing this with the third party. And the first plugin that I use is Kick 2 from Sonic Academy. And this is a plugin that allows you to basically build kicks. There's another one I believe that Vengeance makes that's called like Metric Kick or something like that, but they're all the same kind of thing, which is where you're able to kind of stack different kicks. The cool thing about Kick 2 is that you're able to have a sub, and if I go to the sub view here, you can just define specifically what kind of low end you want. But in this example, I'm not going to be using the sub. For Kick 2, I'm only going to be using the kick transient. And so in Kick 2 here, what I want to do is I want to turn off the sub view so I don't see the sub. I also want to turn the sub control onto mute because I'm not using it. The only thing I'm going to be using are these clicks. The clicks are exactly what they sound like. They're little clicks that you can add on top of the lower end of the kick if you were going to build the low end of the kick inside Kick 2. But here, again, I'm just pretty much using it as a sampler and going through the clicks that they already have inside of Kick 2. Okay, and so pretty basic. Let's just go ahead and play. So you can see I'm only using one click, and here if we come over and click on these, you can see that we can see the waveform, and we have control over the amplitude envelope, which we can completely draw. We can have it curvy like this if we just drag along the line. Now, I'm not an affiliate or sponsored by these guys. I just like this plugin for this purpose. I could double click to create a dot, and I can just change the amplitude length like that. And so pretty convenient, pretty simple. But again, just these little views right here allow me to change the dynamic envelope of the click sound itself, which is going to be really short anyway. But if I need to shorten it again, I could just go like this and shorten it up pretty quickly. But if we come over to the click menu, you can see they have all different kinds of clicks. Here we just have a bunch of clicks, okay? Here we have some effect sounds, so let's click on one. And let's play. Okay, so just different sounds. Here's some house ones. Let's see what they have here. So these are probably all sounds that were just sampled from tracks, and they just loaded them as clicks inside of Kick 2. I like the clicks specifically. Let's listen to those. And we could just go right here. Okay. Now, my favorite is actually the one that just loads on default, which is click 12. God, kick and click are hard to go back and forth with, but and so that's the one that I'm using. And all I'm doing is mixing that in. Okay, it's not rocket science at all, but it gives the kick so much articulation if it's not there. And this kick that I have is kind of soft. Doesn't sound like it, but it doesn't have that articulation at the top. And I'm not saying all kicks need to have this, but if you just feel that, man, my kick just isn't smacking in the way that I want. I've got kind of a busy drum section. You can see there's a lot of sounds going on here, and that kick needs to just be out in front of all of that. And so that's why I need a kick transient in this case, and that's why I'm using kick 2 in this case to add that little click at the top and really help that kick cut through. And you can see I'm just mixing it in at -2.2 with the original kick. All right. Now, one other thing, some of you maybe more experienced might be wondering, well, why not have the kick here on a simpler, right, over here? And what we could do is just have the kick on this MIDI channel and then put the kick transient on this channel as well. And that way we can just have a MIDI note triggering both the kick and the kick transient at the exact same time. So I don't have to have two channels. I can have them, the kick and the transient triggered at the exact same time. Why not do that? And the reason why I don't like to do that is, number one, is visually. I just like to see the two channels that I have. The second reason is that you can see I don't always have the kick transient playing when the kick is playing. So here in the outro, I took the kick transient away. You can see here I have a high pass section for the kick, which is where I'll just apply a high pass onto the kick, but it's the exact same kick as this. But I won't always have the kick transient here. Okay, and so all I'm saying is that sometimes I like to have the kick transient play in a different spot or not at the same time as the kick. And particularly in the intro, the outro, and the breaks, I like to take the kick transient away. Now, of course, you could do that through automation, but there's nothing more faster than just simply going like this and taking away the clips from the arrangement view, okay? And so I just wanted to mention that, the reason why I have these on two different channels visually, and also it makes it a lot easier just to simply move the transient around or take it away if I want to, okay? That's the reason there. Now, another thing that you might be noticing is that I have the kick and the kick transient grouped. And so what's going on the group channel? Okay, so the only thing that's going on is I just have Flatline, and this is a high-quality clipping plugin. Not sponsored by these guys either. I just use this plugin a lot. I love this, and it's this is doing is making sure the kick plus the kick transient don't go over 0 dB. Okay, and that's all that's doing. Now, for me, this is what very important for me because I work in what I call the guillotine style. I produce and mix using the guillotine style, which is where I work at mastering level. Not everybody works this way, but I love it. I can't really see any reason not to. So if you don't, I'd love to get an email from you. But basically, if you're interested in learning about working in the guillotine style, I'll have a link below this video or a button below this video linking you to my mixing course where I break it all down. Okay. And anyway, but this is a very important thing. Let's move on. There's another reason why I like having a clipping plugin here. And that is because when the kick, which is the loudest sound in the track, and the transient add up, they're going to go over 0 dB. And so, yes, this plugin is going to prevent it from going over 0 dB, but at the same time, okay, it's going to cut or square off the transient, and it's going to add in harmonics as a result. So not only am I going to get the kick to cut through a little bit more using the kick transient, but by clipping the kick and the transient, I'm going to introduce a little bit of harmonics right on that transient. And so I'm going to get it to cut through even more. So I'm going to get that kick to cut through both from the transient and from the harmonics generated from the clipping plugin. Okay. And so we're talking about like 1%, 0.5% increases in clarity, in articulation, in our groove. But that's what mixing is all about, those small little wins, those small little gains. We're making 1,000 moves in mixing, and it's just a matter of all of these kind of adding up. And this is just one of those moves that just helps me get a little bit more articulation on the beat and a little bit more clarity in the groove, which is probably the most important thing, in my opinion. And so that's it. It's so simple, right? I'm just mixing in a transient that comes from kick 2. You can see the kick processing here is very minimal as well. Just got to choose the right sample, throw that transient on top in this track, and I'm golden, okay? Because here on the kick, all I'm doing is boosting a little bit of the lows, 50 hertz, just about 2 dB. This utility right here is selecting the left channel, so it's making the kick mono. And finally, the LFO tool here is just taking off the tail end of the kick, chopping it off at the 8th marker, okay? So that's the kick. If I add in the transient, no transient, transient, okay? Super subtle, but to me, it makes a world of difference. It's actually harder to hear when just the kick is playing. It makes it way easier to hear in the context of everything because you could just all of a sudden feel that kick cut through. All right, so that's the first way. Now, if you don't have kick 2, I think it's pretty inexpensive, and I like it for this purpose. But another way that you could do this is using drum racks in Ableton. So if I come over and go to drum rack, and we're just going to drag this on to the new channel, and you know what? I'm going to redo that really quick. Just show you something really cool because while we're here, I'm going to do Shift-Command-T, and you're going to see that by default, my MIDI tracks load a drum rack. And that's because when I'm loading a MIDI channel, a lot of times I'm just going to be loading a drum rack. And if you want to do that, all you have to do is put a drum rack on a channel when you create a new MIDI track, right-click and go to Save as Default MIDI Track. And anytime you open up a new MIDI track, it's going to have drum rack loaded by default. So hopefully that's a cool little tip there. But what we're going to do now is load a bunch of kicks onto this drum rack. And let's go to Vengeance. This is funny because whenever I load Vengeance samples, I'm reminded of this YouTube comment that says, why does all producers use Vengeance samples? And the answer is because they sound legit. Okay, that's really it. They just sound amazing, ready to go. Okay, so we're loading all these samples into the drum rack. And what I could do now is get the LFO tool. Now this is assuming you have the LFO tool, but again, if you don't, after I show you this, I'm going to show you a way that you can set all this up and go through all sorts of kick transients very quickly using Ableton only. And again, we're going to be using some Ableton secret hidden features that I think are going to be pretty cool, but I'm going to have to walk you through them. Okay, so here with LFO tool loaded after the drum rack, very easy. All I have to do is just draw the transient line. So I just need to basically cut everything out but the transient. You see that? So it's just going to cut just that little sliver of sound there. And I'm going to go ahead and drop this MIDI onto the drum rack. Let's collect all and just drop it all the way down to the very bottom. And so if I solo this channel now, you could hear I could just go through transients. Now, we're going through these in isolation, but of course, what you want to do is go through all these transients in the context of your mix. So I'm going to turn off our transient channel here, and let's just kind of see what happens. What I'm going to do is I'm going to turn a lot of these other sounds off just so we're working with the groove, so we're not too distracted here, but here we go. All right, so we have the transient channel. Now let's just go through some of these transients. So this one sounds pretty good to me. Makes sense. Just a simple click. It's pretty much very similar to this. just got a little bit more weight. So I'm thinking what we need to do is back this guy down a little bit more, just like this. Something like that, shorten up the decay envelope. And you can see why Kick 2 is a little bit preferred. I love the LFO tool, but with Kick 2, what I'm able to do, if I come over to the click mode, I could just really get, you see, this is 50 milliseconds in view here, okay? And about from here to here is about 50 milliseconds. And so right there, that's 50 milliseconds. So this is way zoomed in. So I could be extremely detailed with how short this is. You see that? And with LFO tool, I don't have the same amount of detail or control, okay? And I'm a control freak. So that's particularly why I like Kick 2 in this case when I'm just looking for transients, okay? But yeah, that's a way that you can do this if you don't have Kick 2. Just load a bunch of kicks into drum rack, just load the LFO tool, isolate that transient using the volume envelopes, and just scroll through the kicks and find the right transient in context. Very important that you're doing this in context, okay? And I'm just going to make sure that audio is recording. Good. Finally, we are going to walk through how to set this up using Ableton only, okay? So I'm going to get rid of the LFO tool. And everything is pretty much the same as what we've been doing so far. We're going to use drum racks, and we need to load a bunch of kicks onto drum racks. Drum racks allows you to load 128 samples. So we have 128 samples here. Now, what you might notice, depending on your experience level, is that all of these drum pads here have the classic mode loaded. You see that? All of these are the classic mode. But by default, Ableton will load one-shot mode. By default, Ableton will load one-shot mode in drum racks. So if I was going to drop, or if you were going to drop 128 kicks onto your drum rack, all of them would load as one-shot mode. And that makes a lot of sense. The reason is because one-shot mode is going to play the whole sample back regardless of the size of the MIDI clip, okay? Unless, of course, you had gate turned on. If you have gate turned on, then it will cut the sound off depending on the length of the MIDI clip. But if gate is not turned on, it's just on trigger mode here, then the entire drum sound will play back regardless of how big the MIDI clip is. So if we zoom in and we drop this all the way down, okay, just drop that all the way down, then the kick sample is going to play back even though that we're only playing a 30-second note here, okay? And so that's what happens with one-shot mode. It's going to play back the whole sample, but on classic mode, it doesn't play back the whole sample. It depends on the length of the MIDI, okay? And so all I'm saying right now is that it makes a lot of sense that Ableton is going to load one-shot mode by default on drum racks, okay? But what I'm telling you is that for us to do what we want to do here, we need to have Ableton load classic mode on the drum rack by default, okay? You can always go back and change it, and I'm going to show you how to change it. But in order to set this up, and then you can save the drum rack, and you could just forget all about this, okay? So what we need to do is I need to show you how to get drum rack to load drum samples in classic mode by default, okay? And this is what we have to do, okay? So I'm going to get rid of drum rack for now, and we're going to come over to instruments here, and we're going to go to simpler, okay? Now, by default, Ableton loads simpler as classic mode, okay? So don't get confused by that. When you have an empty simpler, it's in classic mode by default. But when you load drum rack, okay, the simpler instruments in drum rack are going to be one-shot mode by default, okay? So empty simpler, classic mode, drum rack, one-shot mode, okay? That's it. What we need to do now, though, is make sure that you have created a default preset file for an empty simpler in classic mode. Now, since it already loads by default, it doesn't have a user-generated default for simpler. So this is what you need to do. Okay, so load simpler, come to one-shot mode, go to set as default preset. Okay, and then it might give you a dialog box, and you just hit OK, and then you just come back to classic mode. Okay, and then you right-click and you go to save as default again. Okay, and so this dialog box is going to pop up. A default preset for simpler already exists. You want to override it, and you say yes. So now what has happened is if you come over to user library, and if we come over to defaults, and if we come over to instruments, you're going to see there's going to be a file in here that says simpler. So this right here is your default simpler file. Okay, now what we need to do is take this simpler default file, which loads in classic mode, okay, and we need to now tell drum rack to load in classic mode. So we need to take this simpler and we need to option drag it into this file right here, this folder right here that says dropping samples. Okay, so let's do that. So let's open up the dropping samples folder. Okay, we just dropped this simpler in here. And what we need to do is we need to copy this simpler into the device view, on device view, and on drum rack. Okay, now I've already done that, so I'm going to go ahead and delete this. Okay, move to trash, and I'll just open this and show you. Okay, there's simpler right there. Okay, and here's simpler right there. And so once you do that, you're good to go. You don't need to close Ableton or anything. Okay, and so now if we create a new default, or if we create a new drum rack, you can see, of course, it loads by default. I just showed you that. But if we come back over to our Vengeance samples, it's going to take a second to load here, but let's drop all these on here again. And you're going to see they are loaded in all in classic mode. And I don't even think I told you why this is important. The reason why this is important is because if we come to the first one here, we need to have control over sustain and decay. Okay, we need decay because with decay here, what we could do is set a fixed decay time for all the samplers. The problem with one-shot mode is that what we need to do is define an endpoint for all the samples, okay? But you can't do that. There's no way to say all samples need to play back at, you know, like 20 milliseconds. There's no way to do that in the one-shot mode. That's why we need to come over to classic mode, because then we can say all samples need to play back at 15 milliseconds with the decay, right? Because we turn the sustain all the way down, we set the decay for 15 seconds, and that means that all these samples, I'm going to show you this in a second, that means all these samples are going to play back at only 15 milliseconds. So there's going to be a fixed and constant transient value, and that makes it really easy to go through and find the right transient, okay? Okay, so now let me back up. So what have we done? Okay, we've done two things. We have now created drum racks to default to classic mode when we load samples. And then the second thing that we've done is we have loaded samples, okay? The next thing we need to do is we need to make sure that all of these samples have similar decay and sustain settings. And so what I'm going to do is here we see on the first one that I'm going to set the sustain to -infinity, and I'm going to copy value to siblings, okay? So that means now no matter what drum pad I go on, you'll see the sustain is set to -infinity, okay? And so now what I want to do is on the decay, let's just go to 15. The 15 is a good starting value, and I'll just right-click and go to copy value to siblings, okay? And right away, this is going to be pretty good, okay? So if I go ahead and copy the MIDI back onto the channel, if we go down, start on the first one, and if we just go through these, you'll hear we just have a transient, okay? Pretty easy. But here is a problem you might come across. What if you're like, I want to change the decay value, but I want to change the decay value on all 128 samples? The problem is that, you know, what if you want to, you can't really do that. Okay, how do you change it so that when you move this knob, for example, all the knobs, all the decay values change? There's no way to do that without this little secret feature inside of Ableton, okay? So this is the next part of what we have to do here. So I told you this is going to be quite a little bit of a walkthrough here, but you know, whatever. Well, let's keep going. So this is what we need to do, and I'm going to show you the feature, and then I'll show you how to do it. So we need to set up a macro. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to map the decay to macro 1, okay? Just like this. Okay, but of course, how do I get the second, the third, all the way up to 128. How do I get the decay onto macro 1? Well, I can actually do that. So I can right click, and you can see right here, map to all siblings. Bam. If I click that, now as I go through the different drum pads, you'll see that all of the decay parameters are mapped to macro 1. See? So this is now, so I'm on the second drum pad. You can see the decay is mapped to macro 1. Let's go all the way up to the top, the very last one, number 128 here. You can see the decay is mapped to macro 1. And now I can change the decay value. And as I change this macro here, the decay value for all the drum pads are changing. Okay, and so that's really important because now I can change the decay value on the fly as I'm listening through the transients. And so you can imagine that's pretty convenient because if I want to let a little bit more of the transient in, if I want to a little bit tighten it up a little bit, I can do that using this macro, and the value will change for all of the samples here in the drum rack. Okay, so how do you do this? Okay, so this is actually pretty cool. And what we need to do is we need to create a text file, okay? A .txt file right here. So on a Mac, this is going to be your text edit file. On Windows, I have no idea. I haven't used Windows in, like 20 years probably. But what you need to do is just create a basic .txt file, and I know you can do that in Windows. And so what you need to do is you need to save this. Okay, we're going to save it to the desktop as options.txt. Okay, that's what you need to do. You need to create a plain text file and save it as options.txt. We'll save that to the desktop for now. Okay. The next thing you need to do is we need to drop that options.txt into the right Ableton folder. So we're going to come over to Finder here in the Mac. And let's start from scratch. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my hard drive. I'm going to go to users. So hard drive users. And we're going to go to the actual user, and that's going to be me. Now what we need to do is go to library. Now library is a hidden feature of Mac. So this little whole thing I'm showing you is not only showing you hidden features in Ableton, but also in Mac. But what we need to do is we need to go to Go up here, and we need to hold down Option. And you'll see now that library is available. So if I hold down Option, you can see library is popping up there. As I take Option away, it's gone. Hit Option again, there's library. And so I'll go ahead and click on library, and that's going to take me to the library folder. Okay, so you can see now this is the library folder. So what we need to do is once we're inside the library folder, we need to come down to Preferences. We need to go to Ableton. You need to go to the Ableton version that you use. So I'm still on Ableton 10. I have Ableton 11, as you can see here, but I'm still using Ableton 10. And so all you need to do is drop that options.txt folder into the Ableton Live folder that you're using. Okay, and that's it. That's what you need to do. Now we need to actually put in the commands. Okay, so I'm going to get rid of the options.txt that we just created, which is desktop. There we go. Okay. So, and now we need to put this text in here. This is what it's all about right here. Okay, this guy right here. And what you need to type is -enable map to siblings equal 1. Okay, you need to have the proper capitalization, all that stuff. But as soon as you do this, as soon as you type that in, it's ready to go. Okay, you're going to have the feature in Ableton. Maybe you'll have to close Ableton and open it up again, but I doubt it. It should just work right away. And so what typing this in allows you to do is it gives you this functionality right down here, which is, let's see, let's map the sustain, for example. Let's come over to the first one just to make sure. We'll map sustain to macro 2, okay? And so what this text right here, it allows you to do is right click and you'll see this now. This is now a new option for you. Map all siblings. And so now we have all the siblings, all the drum pads, all their sustain values are mapped to macro 2. So if I come to any random pad, you'll see the sustain pad, the sustain parameter is now mapped to macro 2, okay? We don't need that. And so I wonder if I'm able to unmap everything. Oh, that's interesting. It doesn't seem like I can unmap everything. But anyway, doesn't matter. That is so outside of the realm of what we're trying to do. So all I'm saying is that this line of code here will give you the option to map all parameters of a drum rack to a macro. Okay. And so, yeah, that's what you have to do. So while we're here, I do have this one. And so you might be wondering, well, what's this one? Now, there's a ton of things that you can drop in this options.txt file. Okay, if you just do an internet search on options.txt, Ableton, hidden features kind of thing, you could find a bunch of these things. But I really only use two. I use the map to siblings, and I use enable arm on selection. So what that means is you can see, for example, if I select the heads track up here, all of a sudden it's automatically armed, so I can start recording. If I click on this bass channel right here, it's already armed. Okay, before, if I clicked on this, it wouldn't be armed, and I have to click it again to arm it, and that was annoying. So this is just another hidden feature of Ableton, where if you select a track, you can automatically arm the channel or get it ready to record. And so these are the two things. This is just enable arm on selection, but that is the secret features, okay, showing you how to create new kind of defaults in the drum rack, and then also showing you how you can enable map to siblings. The last thing we need to do is just see how this actually works, okay? And so, okay, and so now if we just play, obviously 3 milliseconds is really short. Let's hop this up to 15. Okay, but I can now change the decay value for all the sounds in the drum rack, and I can go ahead and just find the right transient. Okay, and of course you want to do that in context so that you can find the right one in the context of your entire mix, and make sure you're getting something that cuts through. But again, super simple idea in the video, just adding in transient to get that articulation on the kick. And I showed you here the 2 different ways that I'll do it, which is, or I guess 3. So you can have the kick 2. Okay, that's the simplest, most straightforward way to do it. Another pretty straightforward way is just to load a bunch of drum racks and then use the LFO tool to define the transient, or you can use Ableton's native kind of parameters here to do it, just to make sure that you have you know, the envelope, the classic mode enabled for the drum racks, and then you just need to map all the decay values, and then you can just look through your drum samples and find the right transient. So I hope that was helpful. Again, if you're interested in mixing, check out the link below for my mixing course, or consider becoming a member of the ZERMELO Inner Circle, where you'll get access to all my courses, plus unlimited feedback on your music. And so that's it. I hope you enjoyed this, and I'll see you in the next video. Peace.